Why is transformation of the main character important?
Well, I think we go to movies really to see transformation, right? Transformation means that the story had an effect. The series of events that you've watched, it had some sort of consequence. It had an effect on the character that went through them. So that's one reason. And then I think also, even if nobody talks about it this way, we look for that transformation as like sort of a inspiration, or you could call it a guide for living a good life, right? Like it's this person went through this experience and sort of came out the other side. It can give you hope. It can give you a little bit of, a guide on how to live and be a better person. But that's kind of like what gives the story meaning in the end,
How does transformation relate to theme?
Well, I think that most often we see the theme of the movie through the character's transformation. So whatever that lesson is that they learn from going through this whole experience, that's basically the theme of your movie. The theme is like the sort of organizing principle of your story, right? Everything connects to the theme. Everything falls under the umbrella of the theme, and the way your movie plays out proves the theme to the audience. And so a big part of that is the way the protagonist goes through the story and what happens to them, how they transform because of what they've gone through. So we see the theme, the meaning, or that takeaway message of the story. We see that through the way the character transforms most often.
For some reason, I'm thinking of like Good Will Hunting. It just popped into my mind. It's been many years since I've seen it. But the transformation of that character and kind of the theme would be what? Just sort of, I know you said hope earlier.
Yeah, well, I think that themes tend to fall into like a couple of categories or patterns, right? One of them can be sort of hope for living, right? And then another kind of category, I think, is like there's beauty in the struggle, right? Like themes kind of fall into these different categories, but specific themes for particular movies, most often I look to the character's transformation or the lesson that they learn to kind of understand what the theme is. In Good Will Hunting, it's been a while since I saw that movie.
Sure, me too, yeah.
I guess, let's see, how does he transform from the beginning to the end?
Well, so he's angry, he gets in fights, he's got this job that, he's kind of looked down upon, but he's definitely smarter than maybe some of the students around him there. And he meets a girl.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the lesson has to do with that big choice that he makes at the end, right? So he sort of learns over the course of this story that he's not doing himself or anyone else any favors by not living up to his potential, right? Again, it's been a while since I saw the movie, so hopefully that's accurate. But I would say that, that if you look at his transformation and sort of the key lesson that he needs to learn, or that he does learn by the end of that story, then that's kind of the key to your theme. I would say that lesson is basically the theme. You could reword it a little bit, and then if that's accurate, say for Good Will Hunting, if the lesson that he learns is, life is about living up to your potential, for example. I don't know if that's true, but we'll say that that's the lesson he learns in Good Will Hunting. I would say that the theme of the movie would be very close to that. So the overall message that story would send, that you would maybe walk away from the movie understanding, is living up to your potential is what life's about, or it's how to live a good life, is to try to, strive to live up to your potential, or what have you.
What does the audience need to see in each act in order to understand the protagonist's transformation?
Oh, well, I think the transformation has, it has an arc of its own. So in the same way that like the plot has a setup and a build and a resolution, I think the character's arc also has those parts. So in Act 1, we need to set up that arc by understanding what the character needs, right? Like what is their deficit, or what lesson do they need in their life? What sort of are they doing wrong, or how are they seeing the world in a way that's not serving them, and what effect is it having on their life? So we need to see that they need a lesson, and we need to understand that they do need it, and usually that's by seeing some sort of negative effect that not understanding that lesson is having on their life, right? And then in Act 2, that's where we see kind of the the story of this arc play out. So we need to see the things that the protagonist experiences in the story, sort of forcing him along that growth arc, forcing him to realize the lesson that he needs, to get closer to accepting it, or to maybe the character is resisting learning this lesson, and the things that he's going through are forcing him closer and closer to kind of that breaking point where he's going to finally understand what he needs to learn from this whole mess, right? So Act 2 forces the plot events and the experiences that the character has, forces him sort of closer to understanding the lesson, that thematic lesson, right? And then in Act 3, that's where we get to see the character embrace this lesson or not, right? In most movies that we watch that have sort of transformed characters and happier endings, usually they accept the lesson and embrace it and incorporate it into the way they approach the world. And then that's how we see that arc resolve.
How does character lead to plot?
Oh, well, I think you can use character to sort of lead you to figure out plot by related to character arc, right? So understanding what lesson your character might need to learn or what transformation you want this character to have, right? And this is sort of coming at it from a meaning point of view instead of an external plot point of view. So coming kind of from inside the story to figure out the plot. So if you start with character and you think about what lesson do I want this character to learn, or what transformation can I imagine this character going through that interests me, that can lead you to plot because you know that the plot that they experience needs to sort of create that change in the character, right? Those events have to force that character to learn that lesson. So you can sort of reverse engineer the plot from the transformation that the character's going through. Thinking about, okay, here's the transformation that interests me. I'm curious about a character who maybe goes from being an independent single guy who's determined not to have any ties or serious relationships to being someone who is committed and surrounded by close relationships with friends and family, right? So that's his transformation, just for example. If you're interested in a character that makes that transformation, then you can reverse engineer the plot to think about what kind of events would force somebody to make that change, to learn that lesson and sort of transform in that way.
Do you see that from time to time with new writers, that there's not a real lesson that's learned with their character and then having to go back and rework it?
Yeah, I do, because I think that not all the time, but a lot of newer writers, and not even newer writers, a lot of writers come at story from interesting plot, right? From interesting what if, situations that are cool or fun, and then, developing the character to go along with it. And there's certainly nothing wrong with that. I think about story in that way too a lot of the time. But I think for newer writers, then the challenge is understanding that the transformation or the character development side of the story is still needed, is important, right? And we talked about earlier that writing a screenplay is really getting a handle on lots of different skills. It's a bunch of different skill sets that you sort of have to employ all at the same time. And I think character development tends to be one that maybe not as forgotten, but gets pushed to the side because, the plot is the thing that you need to have, right? In order for your movie to begin and eventually end, that you have to sort of work out the steps of the plot. But character, you can have characters show up on the page and go through this plot without making a change, right? And you can still write a complete screenplay that way, right? So then that's another skill set to master, I think, or to learn about. And so yes, with newer writers, I think a lot of times, not even a lot of times, but often you'll see a complete story and the story is there. And maybe they know that the character should learn something across the course of the story, but they haven't fully, gotten every step of that transformation kind of worked out in there.
Sure, so maybe too worried about just how the overall story is and then not really seeing this change in the character at the end.
Yeah, and I think that for, again, because it's so many skill sets, it's not even, it's certainly not deliberate of like, oh, I'm not going to worry about character, and it's also not, I guess, it's a very easy thing because you're trying to juggle so many moving parts when you write a screenplay that I totally understand not maybe doing all of the character development up front that you could, right? So it's just part of the rewrite process. Like you go through it many times and then hopefully you get the character there too.
Yeah, hence the second set of eyes to
yes.
see.
Yeah, exactly.
You said there's so many skill sets to writing a screenplay. Can you just clarify what some of those skill sets are?
Yeah, I just think, we usually think about writing a screenplay as it's just one thing. It's one story that I'm putting down on paper, but when you try to write a screenplay well, you probably eventually realize that there's understanding structure, there's understanding plot and how to escalate conflict, there's understanding character and character development, theme and how theme works with transformation, right? And that's just kind of like big stuff. And then you also think about like the on-the-page craft, writing action lines well, writing dialogue well, like there's all these not little, but there are all these different skill sets that go into making a really good screenplay. And I think it's a lot more than writers realize maybe at first when they come at writing a script, because you have an idea and you love your story idea and you start putting it down on paper, and that's great. I think that's the way, the best way to learn is through experience and through trying it. But eventually I think, anyone who's written a script or two sort of realizes, oh, this is harder than I realized it was going to be, because there are so many different things that I have to be good at in order to make the whole thing good,
So if someone just erases a paragraph on page 68, it's going to change things maybe, on page 10 that they didn't, oh, wait a minute, I just realized if I do that, that's a major thing I have to then go back.
Yeah, for sure. Everything's interdependent. And I think also, this is what makes the rewriting process so fun and so challenging, is that because you can be good at one thing or have one thing kind of figured out, one area, one skill set or whatever, worked out, and still be struggling with other areas. And because they're related, they will probably affect each other. Or, a lot of times, like we were just talking about, character gets sort of short shrift, while we're trying to work out the plot, because there's so much to think about in how do I structure this plot, and how do I escalate the conflict, and how do I make sure that it's logical from beginning to end, and so then in the rewrite, you're going to have to bring that character development kind of to the front of your mind and pay attention to it as you're rewriting it. But yes, everything's interdependent, and I think even when you have like some of those skill sets really worked out, the plot's great or whatever, when one of them isn't working, like say the character development or say the dialogue you just haven't paid attention to and it needs a lot of work, it sort of, you realize how much work goes into a screenplay, how many different skill sets you need in order to complete that thing in a way that like can be appreciated as a whole,